to show for my sins. A bloodstained smile, a gunshot eye, and a kiss like a dirty child. But you can save me anytime. Save me anytime. I retreat into myself for a week or maybe more. I do these things that you and I deplore. I can't be trusted with my friends, and I'm sure I can't be trusted with myself anymore. And you can save me anytime. Save me anytime.
Who's a kid? Who's a mother? We're all as lost as each other. Who's a killer? Who's a lover? I can't tell the one from the other. But you can save me anytime. Save me anytime.
Blood dragged itself upwards. The whole body's worth packed tight under the top of my skull. An impossible accommodation. A gathering breath before brutal redistribution. I saw my mouth open and my fingers working during those moments of tantalizing semi-freedom from my carcass. I tore out, strained, was yanked back in. This was a new, frank, dark sacrament. Something no nonsense, sure of itself. There were flecks of resistance, I imagined dashing my head on the stone mullion. But the other thing swept them aside. The other thing. Indeed, a brother, a tall twin from before birth, with an agenda of brisk recalibration. He arrived with non-negotiable needs, or needs negotiable only in their potential expansion. Enough now was no guarantee of enough later. My shoulders shifted, not without difficulty learnt the strange game of osteomorphosis, bore the hurried tectonics, the sensation of turning to ice, and the shocking thaw that left a new grammar of movement. Shoulders, wrists, ankles, first to change, last to change back. I rolled onto my side, fairy talishly too big for the bed, since everything was growing. The not toenails nor quite claws had scarred the inlaid rosewood. I dropped onto the floor, dizzied by the inrushing night's symphony of smells, from the garden's shut roses to the field's wealth of dung. An acre of wheat in the south crackled and splashed. Invisible giant hands gripped my neck and twisted in opposite directions. The schoolyard bully's Chinese burn writ large. A necessity, it turned out, for the head's jerky magic into its more blatantly predatory lineaments. My lupine twin was impatient. A being was no good without a body. The slow hindquarters tested his tolerance of delay and mine of pain. It was still him and me, but we eyed each other knowing everything depended on bridging the gap. Cooperation would come. The two strands would plait so that we would become I. But it was his birthright to take the inaugural moment by force. For a moment, I squatted on new, long, hairy haunches in the open window. Matter, raped and rearranged, murmured its trauma in the quivering cells. Consciousness, it transpired, was tender, could be hurt by something rough shoving itself in next to it. A pause, as if a muted bell had clanged. The night's soft tumult stopped. Complete silence and stillness. This was sufferance on his part, a moment allowed to mark the passing of the life I'd known. I looked out at the moonlit topiary, the pale flowers, the lawn holding its breath. I waited. Nothing. Here again was the colossal silence where God's, someone's, anyone's voice should have been. Learn this lesson now, my brother said. I shan't teach it twice. There is nothing. It means nothing. Then the night exhaled and flowed again. I knew with clairvoyant weariness I'd go back countless times to the question of why, how. But knew too I carried the answer inside. It had gone in like an inhaled speck of toxic dust. Life is nothing but a statement of what happens to be. That is all you know on earth, and all you need to know. A few seconds wasn't much to swallow a universe of pointlessness, but it was all the time I had. A breeze stirred the honeysuckle, the hairs on my ears and delirious wet snout. My scrotum twitched, and my breath passed hot over my tongue. I pictured my human self jumping the 20 feet, felt the shock of smashed ankles and slivered shins. Then the new power, like an inkling of depravity. I leapt from the window and bounded into the moonlight. Thank you. Okay, let's have it then. Yeah, thank you so much, Kendall, for that beautiful, beautiful singing.
Kendall, we only got together last night to do this song, so let's give her a big New York round of applause. And she added a bit of much-needed glamour, I thought, to
Definitely, yeah.
to the visuals.
It would have been a drab prospect without you, Kendall. So feel free. Anybody would like to ask any questions or throw anything? Surely not. Yes. You, I think.
So Glenn and I are childhood friends. We grew up in the same very small town in the northwest of England. And so we did a collaboration around Glenn's book, I, Lucifer, back in 2003 or 4. Same thing, a sort of soundtrack to a book. And Glenn's written several books since, and I've made some records since. And then when he wrote The Last Werewolf and sent it to me, we thought it would be good again to do a soundtrack to this book, because it's one of those books. Have you read it? Well, you'll find out. It's one of those books.
But there's no real fancy explanation for how the collaboration came about, except that we knew each other and, sort of drunk one night in the pub. Somebody, I can't remember whether it was Stephen or me, said it would be fun to have a soundtrack to a book as opposed to a soundtrack to a movie, and we just really did it as a bit of a laugh. But with the earlier novel, I, Lucifer, it sort of took off. Lots of people really liked it. Listeners came to the book through the music, and readers came to the music through the book. That book, somewhat like this, was a mix of sort of metaphysical speculation and levity, and some, I suppose, quite dark stuff as well. What with it being about the devil and all. But that seems to be the kind of blend that works best with the music. I mean, Stephen's got a similar sensibility in terms of how he approaches these things, except mine's better, obviously. So yeah, I mean, it just seemed like a sort of fun thing to do, and it took off from there. Anyone else?
How long did it take you to write the book? Was it like multiple drafts, or?
No, it was pretty quick actually. Once I'd got started, I think probably wrote in about, I don't know, maybe 4 months, something like that. But I mean, that's not normal. I mean, it's not normal for me. There are other novels that have taken considerably longer. But it was also a book that didn't really, there wasn't much editorial work. There were a few sort of tweaks and twists, but it was a quick one to write. The character was, I mean, once the character was up and running, it was really pretty easy because he wrote himself, Yes.
Did you do any research on werewolves or anything like that before you started writing?
Somebody asked me this the other day, and the answer that I always want to give is, I spent 6 months at the University of Werewolf Studies in Alaska, and blew the dust off venerable old tomes. But I'm afraid the unglamorous and unspectacular answer is no, I didn't do any research at all. I just consulted my own sort of imagination and the stockpile of images and ideas that I'd had, growing up watching horror movies like everybody else. So. This is the great advantage of writing about mythic or archetypal or fantastical figures, which is that nobody can actually write in and say, well, I think you'll find, Mr. Duncan, that actually werewolves are, Whereas if you're writing about sort of trains or, something which has a basis in the real world, there are many people out there just waiting for you to make a mistake. So no research, I'm afraid. Yes?
Metaphorically speaking, in what ways would you say an artist is like a werewolf or an artist is like a vampire?
I think it's the agents that are normally associated with vampires. Sorry, Jane, not you. Not by me anyway. In what way? I don't know. I mean, except in the most basic sense that most novels, well, in fact, art in general that's worth its salt is almost always about transformation of one kind or another. There's a very basic sort of desire for that. Stories of metamorphosis go back as long as there have been stories. But I suppose there is also, I mean, for some writers, I'm probably one of them. There is a confessional aspect to writing. I grew up Roman Catholic, so that's not so surprising. But everything that I've written so far has been about the gap between what we are and what we'd like to be. That's where comedy is, and that's where horror is as well. So I don't know that there's any particular, there's nothing particularly resonant about werewolves in relation to writing, except that they are, by definition, creatures of horribly warring desires, which is what I think we are. So all these things, I mean, if they're not ultimately about human beings, then I wouldn't bother writing them. So that's about as far as the correspondence goes, I think. Anybody else?